Good morning, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Thursday, October 30th, Hallows Eve edition of the Dubcast with our proud beat correspondent at 11 Warriors, Andy Anders. Andy, I thought you would be more dressed up for Halloween, maybe some Bengals flair or something, but it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe you'll surprise us on Friday or something. But how are you doing on this Hallows Eve as we prepare for the Penn State game?
Yeah, doing all right, hanging in there. Had a bit of a death in the family this week. So that's been a little I had a pretty sad funeral service on Tuesday, but we're back in action. We're covering Ohio State, getting back to work now, and it was my cousin's wife who passed, so definitely shout out to him, and he's now a single father, and their family, and yeah, just especially feel for them, and um yeah, trying to chug along with this week and get back to work a little bit myself.
Well, my condolences to you. I recently had someone pass away in my family as well. The last weekend I was working at 11 Warriors, actually, my grandmother passed away, and I'll be going back to Ohio for her funeral the day before the Ohio State Michigan game, the day after Thanksgiving. We'll be doing that. So yeah, my condolences to you and your family, and all the best to them moving forward. But yeah, it is a we do have to keep pressing on, as is our duty here at 11 Warriors to bring the latest in analysis to all the Ohio State fans out there. We've made a regular theme of talking about the running back rotation with you on the show when we've had you this season, as that seems to be the most uncertain part of the offense, I think, all things considered. It's been a good all around season once again for Ohio State football, all things considered, but a lot of things, a lot of moving parts, and people overtaking certain roles in various respects in this Ohio State backfield. And that was certainly on display again against Wisconsin. And you wonder how things have shuffled over the course of the bye week as we prepare to head down the stretch and look ahead to the Penn State game. Before we get into the nitty gritty of that, though, we do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor at 11 Warriors and uh, the 11 Dubcast this Ohio State football season. That would be First Bank of Central Ohio. From game day to work day, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. So, Andy, the theme of running back rotation this year, the big shakeup has traditionally been Bo Jackson, but that started with the Grambling State game, and I was cautiously skeptical, not of Bo Jackson's ability, but just of how involved are the guys at the back of the rotation 2 games into the season, uh, after flashing against an FCS opponent, presumably Ohio State's weakest opponent on the schedule, in a game that was largely in garbage time. I don't know how much of that effectiveness that we saw in the second half of that game is really going to translate to what we see going forward the rest of the season. Obviously, Bo Jackson quickly overtook the top of the pecking order among Ohio State's running backs within a few games after that, to the point that he's clearly the guy at the top of the food chain. However, the other interesting talking point coming out of that Grambling State game was how good can Isaiah West be for this Ohio State team? Maybe if not this year because of all the guys in front of him, then at least somewhere into the future. And then the Wisconsin game happened. And while the big surprise, I think, for a lot of people was that Julian Sayin got 42 passing attempts against a team that Ohio State was favored by 24 and a half points against, when a lot of the offense has been more conservative this season, the more understated talking point coming out of that game was that Isaiah West led this team in carries. 10 carries or 9 carries, right? He did not lead the team in carry. He led the team in rushing yards. He only got one less carry than Bo Jackson, but he was far and away the most effective rusher Ohio State had against Wisconsin. Granted, this was a game where the passing attack was really the star. Ohio State didn't have a single rushing touchdown in this game that they won 34-0, but it still makes you wonder, in a game where you would have assumed that they would have leaned more on the rushing attack for a greater length of it, given how much of a projected chasm there was between the talent of their opponent versus themselves, Isaiah West still got or proved to be the most effective rusher and got a relatively equal workload to the guy that was at the front of the pecking order. And this is now the two running backs that were presumed to be in the back of the rotation relative to James Peoples and CJ Donaldson that seem to have both jumped ahead of both of those guys that were presumed to be the leaders of the pack at the start of the season. So, did it surprise you to see Isaiah West get that much work in the Wisconsin game? And how much do you think that's going to be a theme going forward? Of we know Bo Jackson is one of their guys, but has Isaiah West kind of made a case for himself after this most recent performance that he's going to overtake and eat into the workloads of CJ Donaldson and James Peoples down the stretch?
Yeah, I would say I was surprised, at first when you see the workload that he was getting, and it kind of evolved throughout the game, right? He got more as it went on, and then it was a blowout, so there's an opportunity to get that guy you're kind of wanting to get a look at with him. And he was definitely the most productive rusher of the day, as you said. I think Bo Jackson was clearly still nursing that ankle injury he sustained against Illinois the previous week, the one that sidelined him for really a lot of the back end of that contest, and wasn't at 100%, didn't look like he was running at 100%. But Isaiah West, like, once you saw it, it made sense because, yeah, he just looked like the best rusher we've seen this season outside of Bo Jackson when Bo's been healthy and at his peak. And the numbers really bear that out. Not just rushing yards, like total rushing yards, carries, yards per carry, all that stuff is obviously things you want to look at for a running back, but the advanced stats really help you out when evaluating these things, stuff that like Pro Football Focus provides. Because look, there can be lapses in run blocking, and if two guys are hitting you in the backfield on one of your handful of carries, that's going to tank your numbers a little bit, and it's not anything you did wrong. But the really telling number, I think, is that in just 21 carries this year, Isaiah West has already made six people miss. He's forced six missed tackles. James Peoples has that same number in 40 carries, and CJ Donaldson has only made two tacklers miss in 60 carries. Um, so he had more against Wisconsin. He had three forced missed tackles against Wisconsin than Donaldson has had all year. Now, CJ's job a lot of times when he's in there is not to make someone miss, it's to plow forward, move the chains, get into the end zone and short yardage, those types of areas. But just looking at what Isaiah West has done, and his yards after contact numbers have been better too. It's a small sample size. It was a Wisconsin team that was somewhat overmatched, but the counter to that is the only strength of the Wisconsin defense, and probably why we saw so much passing from Ohio State in that game, is their run defense. This was a run defense that came in as one of the top 10 in the country in terms of rushing yards allowed per game. I'm not sure where they rank exactly coming out of that game. Of course, Ohio State didn't rack up a ton of rushing yardage, but still did a few things on the ground, I guess. I just think that Isaiah West did make a real statement in this one that is worth evaluating, and we've seen Ryan Day praise him multiple times since that game. And for me, like, you talk about tells when you work with a head coach, a coach of any sport for a long time as a sports reporter, right? In interviews, you got to kind of cut through and dig down below the coach speak sometimes. Not that Ryan Day isn't a great quote, isn't always very courteous and eloquent in his interviews, but whenever he starts referencing specific plays from a player, like, he's never going to talk down very directly on a guy in a post game presser. Like, but whenever he starts mentioning specific plays from a player, that he's complimenting, to me, it's always an indicator that that player's stock is rising with him. And he mentioned specifically two runs that Isaiah West had, both after the game and then I think the next week, either in our press conference with him or on the Buckeye Roundtable show he does Mondays on 97.1 The Fan, where he referenced those two specific plays where Isaiah West made a guy missed and picked up more yardage than they've seen out of Donaldson or Peoples in similar running areas, where he Yeah, he just finds that crease, makes a guy miss, picks up extra yardage than you expected on that run. Like there was one he made someone miss at the line of scrimmage. A lot of backs don't gain any yards there. He makes a tackle or miss, he picks up 7, you know. He had a 15-yard run where he broke a couple of tackles. Like this is the type of stuff that can really help the Ohio State backfield, and it's clear that he was the most productive rusher in that Wisconsin game. Now, what does that mean going forward? Not 100% certain. How much stock do you put into that one performance? And there's been some other good moments from West throughout the year, but this was really his first time going against like the first team defense of an opponent. Um, where does it translate? Does he then rise above Peoples and Donaldson? I think that's the question. And Ryan Day has kind of stayed mum at that. He kind of said last week that they don't have an established hierarchy at running back because they have so many young players. But the telling part will be what we see this Saturday. I still expect Bo Jackson to continue to get the most carries, but who's that second back will be very interesting to follow.
Yeah, Bo. I mean, the ascension of Bo Jackson didn't just happen after one game. It was if you want to call it a series of somewhat underwhelming performances from Peoples and Donaldson that created an opportunity for Jackson to insert himself and then thrive in an area where he kind of became undeniably the most talented, explosive runner and earned that role at the front of the pack. It it makes sense his ascension, and that if you were to kind of look at it in a similar framework relative to what West has done, he probably deserves a role based on the what he's demonstrated in the opportunities that he's gotten. You just don't know if it's going to be much of a workload, perhaps, as what Jackson got, given what he demonstrated and the fact that he hasn't underwhelmed at the front compared to what was going on earlier in the season. That being said, the other side of this equation is, having a 2 or 3 back committee is one thing. I can't really recall a lot of 4-person running back committees in at in general at high level football. In the same way that people like to say, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you really have none. If you have 4 running backs, how many do you really have? You should be feeding your most effective players and allowing them to get into a rhythm as opposed to divvying up carries and touches of the football that evenly across so many different mouths to feed, so to speak. So the other side of this is, if West is going to ascend, then one player presumably has to descend. Now, we're about 2 weeks removed from the Wisconsin game at this point, so I hadn't looked at the box score for about a week until I was ready to jump on this show with you. And so I assumed that all 4 of those guys got their touches at some point in this game. I was stunned to find out upon recollection that Peoples actually didn't even get a single rushing attempt in this game. Julian Sayin had 5 rushing attempts, and we've hardly talked about him utilizing his legs at all this season by comparison. Donaldson only got 2 carries himself, although one of them went for 13 yards. So he, at the very least, coming out of this game, you would think Donaldson, especially with what we've talked about on this show previously, in terms of him still kind of having that short yardage role, if not locked down, at least one of the people at the front of the line for getting those types of carries. You still feel like if they're going with the pair and the spare approach, that Donaldson would be that guy that is at least occupying that third role if it isn't going to be West. But regardless of how you slice it, it seems like Peoples, who was presumably the front running back that they were going to be going to at the beginning of the season, has now kind of found himself on the way out of this rotation. How how has this come to pass? It's not often that you see a situation like this where, especially at Ohio State, where a guy at the front of the pack over the course of 2/3 of the season has fallen so far down the pecking order. Where do you think the shortcomings have been with Peoples in this regard relative to expectations? And do you think there's going to be an opportunity for him to earn some of that work back? Or do you think at this point of the season you have to go with the guys that have proven the most effective, and that we're probably going to see West take over more of his role consistently going forward?
Yeah, you certainly have to get close to establishing the guys that you find most effective and utilizing them more. Then again, you go back to the college football playoff last year and see Ohio State made real changes, not at running back, but on its offensive line late in the season, and was still able to roll with that. So I think guys can prove and have their stock rise and fall um, as the season goes on. I think with James, it's kind of the same problems we've talked about before, where I think there's some clear development that needs to happen, maybe hasn't happened as much as it needs to with his vision, hitting the right holes on plays, those types of things. And then he hasn't made as many guys missed as, kind of pointed out earlier that you were expecting and hoping for him to do as like, originally him and CJ Donaldson were calling themselves Sonic and Knuckles, like the iconic pairing up there in Detroit of Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery. Obviously haven't lived up to that bit of self-acclaim, I guess you could say. But if Peoples was supposed to be Sonic in that, then he needed to get more guys to miss, break off more big runs, get more chunks. And clearly that hasn't happened other than, a few weeks ago he had I don't know why I can't remember the opponent right now, but he had a few nice runs at the end of the game a few weeks ago. Then we really haven't seen him since that. I think he's still gotten snaps in some passing situations. They still really like him as a pass protector, maybe a check down receiving back. But then again, I think Bo Jackson is better at that, clearly, like ball in his hands, yards after catch. Probably not as strong as a pass protector, but if that's the only thing you're doing well and you have other backs who can do those things, like CJ Donaldson's good in pass protection, I don't think Bo Jackson's been that bad. Really haven't seen it that from Isaiah West, but um, like you said, it's hard to it's already hard to keep three mouths fed at the running back position. Four is pretty nigh impossible. I think the only times you've ever seen Ohio State go with a four running back rotation was back in the early 90s, like 1991, 1992. They used to really like you talked about like Robert Smith, Rayvon Harris, Jeff Cothran, Butler by Note. These guys, like, when again, it was kind of a committee and they didn't really necessarily, they might establish one or two guys that were featured, but they work in a whole list of running backs. Those were much more run centric years and also not the best Ohio State football teams that had ever hit the field. But I guess if you have to go back 30 years to find that precedent, I don't think it really applies as much to today. When you talk about involving four running backs, I don't think it would be a sustainable thing. Somebody's going to have to get left out, and unfortunately, with the kind of niche that Donaldson has found as that power back, short yardage guy, take some reps off the young guy, or now young guys. If West is emerging as your number two, that leaves unfortunately James Peoples out on the outside looking in, and it's then hard to regain that role in practice. But yeah, I'm not going to write him off completely, but it is telling what we've seen so far from this backfield. There's enough data on everyone, I'd say maybe except Isaiah West, because I still want to see it another game from him, that sort of production, that sort of ability to make guys miss, pick up those extra yards. But as it stands right now, I think he's earned the opportunity to prove that by getting the kind of share that a number two back would get. Now that hopefully Bo Jackson is back to full health with the bye week and the ability to recover.
All right. Well, listen, Buckeye fans, if you for any reason have ever questioned whether Andy Anders' heart is in this job, he just ripped off an entire running back rotation from that predates my lifetime in Ohio State lore. So you cannot question that this man knows ball relative to Ohio State and is at least as much of a historian when it comes to Buckeye football as our data analyst Matt Gutrich is. So I have to give you props for that because I don't think I could have done that myself. Certainly not with any running back room from
I didn't
before I
have it
was alive.
memorized. I had to look it up. I knew, yeah. Yeah.
In any event, you're professional. Well done. I couldn't even tell that you had looked at it. It really seemed like you just came up with that off rip. So I give you major props for that. But in any event, I do agree with you that yeah, I there's still plenty of opportunity left and you don't want to see anybody get written off. I mean, we want to see everybody succeed on this team. I feel like you're kind of shortchanging yourself and in it for the wrong reasons as a fan if you don't want to see as many people on the team succeed as possible. That being said, you do have to be realistic about what's going to be the most successful approach for the team. It would seem like at this point that West and Jackson and probably Donaldson are the three best backs this team has, but we still have 4 games left in the regular season. We still have opportunities before the schedule gets more difficult and Ohio State gets closer to having to defend its national title against the best teams yet to come. Where in the meantime, there's still opportunities for not only West to establish himself as someone deserving of a bigger role in the offense, but also for Peoples to potentially rebound with whatever opportunities he gets. So, as we prepare for Penn State this weekend, and then Purdue and UCLA and Rutgers. I guess there's 5 games left in that sense. So so we've got 5 games left. So 4 games before the Michigan game, but still plenty of opportunity in this regular season for those guys to not only establish themselves, but also potentially bounce back. So it'll be interesting to see how that begins to take shape as Ohio State welcomes Jim Knowles back to Columbus this weekend. I'm sure any running back that embarrasses Jim Knowles in his homecoming to Columbus will certainly earn some nice brownie points with Ryan Day this weekend. So that'll go a long way to establishing the pecking order going forward. But one game at a time. We're all looking forward to Big Noon kickoff this weekend, and we look forward to getting the latest from that from the rest of the beat, which includes Mr. Andy Anders, who once again, we thank you very much for taking the time to join us on the Dubcast today. And we will be back tomorrow morning to preview the Penn State game with Dan Hope. Until then, Andy, thanks for joining us. Thank you to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. And thank you for tuning into the Dubcast, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care, folks.